I'm Catherine Burns, 34 years old. At my parents' 35th wedding anniversary party, my sister, Serafina, tried to publicly take me down. In front of my father's closest friends, she pointed at my old Honda and declared, "That pile of scrap metal is an embarrassment to this entire family." But then, something unexpected happened. The rage I had braced myself for never arrived. Instead, a profound sense of peace washed over me, and I smiled. Before I continue my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Please hit the like button and subscribe to hear the rest of my story. That smile, it felt like a lifetime in the making. It wasn't a sudden reaction born in that moment of insult, but the culmination of a long, quiet war. And that night at the Oakmont Heritage Club was the final battle. The whole ordeal started just moments earlier with a sound I knew all too well. The quiet shudder of my 10-year-old Honda Accord as I turned the key. Before I could even unbuckle my seatbelt, I saw her, Serafina. She was gliding across the manicured asphalt of the parking lot, her shimmering Layla Rose dress a declaration of war against my simple blazer and slacks. This wasn't just a country club, it was my family's stage, a place where worth was measured by the shine on your shoes and the name on your credit card. She didn't just walk, she performed, a practiced smile fixed on her face as she approached me with a man I recognized instantly, State Senator Allen. My sister had timed her ambush perfectly. "Senator Allen, this is my little sister, Catherine," she said, her voice as sweet as honey, but her eyes held a familiar, cold fire. She paused, letting the silence hang in the air for a moment too long. "She's a free spirit." The words were coated in a thin veneer of affection, but to anyone who understood the Burns family dialect, it was a clear insult. It meant aimless, unsuccessful, a disappointment. Then she turned to me, her smile tightening as she lowered her voice, a conspiratorial whisper meant only for the three of us. "Next time you decide to show up looking like a beggar, at least have the decency to park with the staff. You look pathetic." My throat went tight. I offered a short, silent nod to the senator, whose own face was a mask of discomfort. He was a decent man, caught in the crossfire of a familial cruelty he clearly didn't understand. And in that moment, his secondhand shame felt worse than my sister's venom. It made the humiliation real, reflected in the eyes of a stranger. Before I could process the sting, another hand was on my arm. My mother, Eleanor. Her grip was like a vice, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my elbow. She pulled me away with a frantic urgency, her jaw clenched. "Katie, for God's sake, can't you just make things easy for once?" she hissed, her voice a low, furious whisper as she steered me toward the club's grand oak doors. "That car, this outfit. Are you deliberately trying to embarrass your father?" There was no defense for me, no question of what Serafina had said, only accusation. In her world, I wasn't the victim of a public slight. I was the saboteur of her carefully curated family portrait. The one rogue brushstroke that ruined the masterpiece. The feeling of being treated like a wrecking ball by your own mother. It's a pain that cuts deeper than any insult from a sister. It tells you that your place in the family is conditional, based entirely on your ability to uphold the illusion. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old money, leather, and lilies. Before dinner, I made my way to the bar, intending to get a simple glass of water to find a quiet corner to brace myself for the evening ahead. But there was no escape. My father, Dr. Alistair Burns, appeared beside me, his hand landing heavily on my shoulder. It was a gesture that looked paternal to the outside world, but I knew it for what it was, a gesture of control. He was with one of his partners from the surgical practice. "And this," he announced with a magnanimous sweep of his free hand, "is my youngest, Catherine. She's pursuing some tech projects right now, very creative." He drew out the word creative as if it were a synonym for unemployed. The partner offered a polite, strained smile and asked what, specifically, I did. I opened my mouth to explain, to talk about logistics software, about supply chain optimization for critical infrastructure. But I never got the chance. "Oh, she's terribly busy. Serafina's voice cut in from behind me, sharp and dismissive. She had materialized like a shark sensing blood, busy dreaming of changing the world from her garage. The small group of men around my father chuckled. It wasn't a kind laugh. It was the laugh of people who understood the code. The joke was on me. The garage startup narrative, a celebrated American myth for men like Mark Zuckerberg, became a punchline when applied to me. I just stood there, the cold glass of water sweating in my hand, feeling invisible. Dinner was the main event, a meticulously orchestrated torture set against a backdrop of pristine white linen and glistening silverware. It felt less like a celebration and more like an inquisition. They passed platters of oysters Rockefeller and slices of beef Wellington like they were passing judgment. Each clink of a fork against a plate felt like a gavel striking down. Serafina held court, recounting a recent victory in a high-profile malpractice suit she'd won, a case that had brought a seven-figure settlement to her prestigious Virginia law firm. My father nodded along, beaming with a pride he never showed me. He praised her brilliance, her tenacity, her killer instinct. Then, the spotlight swung to me. The entire table fell quiet as my father cleared his throat and fixed his gaze on me. "Well, Katie," he began, a mock thoughtful expression on his face. "I hear Mark Zuckerberg's company started in a garage, too. So, what stage are you at? Sold any hoodies yet?" The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavier and louder than the polite chatter that had filled the grand dining hall just moments before. Every eye at the table was on me, waiting for me to crumble, to defend myself, to show a crack in my composure. I didn't give them the satisfaction. I calmly picked up my knife and fork, cut a piece of my medium-rare steak, and brought it to my mouth. I chewed slowly, deliberately, tasting the metallic tang of the beef, the sharp bite of injustice. I said nothing. I just ate. And in that ringing silence, a question surfaced, clear and calm, cutting through the noise of my own humiliation. Why? Why didn't this hurt anymore? Why did their words, which once could have shattered me, now feel like stones skipping harmlessly off the surface of a deep, still lake? The steady drone of my Honda's engine on Interstate 66 was a familiar rhythm, a hypnotic hum that always seemed to pull me back in time. Back to Afghanistan. Back to the place that answered the question echoing in my mind. Why didn't their words hurt anymore? At the dinner party, my sister Serafina talked about pressure. To her, pressure was facing a tough judge or billing enough hours to make partner. She has no idea what real pressure is. Pressure isn't a courtroom. Pressure is getting a radio call that a convoy carrying blood reserves has been delayed 24 hours and the field hospital in Kandahar has only enough for 3 more surgeries. Pressure is the lives of 3 soldiers depending on you finding a damn transport plane willing to fly into a hot zone before they bleed out. That was my world. A world where failure wasn't measured in lost profits, but in body bags. A world where a 10-year-old Honda that starts every single time isn't a symbol of shame, but a testament to reliability. A virtue that could mean the difference between life and death. Their insults about my car, my career, my life, they were like paper bullets against steel. And I was forged in fire. I'll never forget the night in the Arghandab Valley. It's seared into my memory. The moon was a pale sliver, casting an eerie glow over the barren, rocky hills. Then the silence was torn apart by the bright orange streak of an RPG. The lead Humvee in our convoy exploded in a flash of light and metal. The radio crackled to life with screams, the air filled with the coppery smell of burnt wiring and something else. Something sickeningly sweet. I was a logistics officer, a glorified supply clerk, according to my father. But in that moment, job titles didn't matter. I was on the floor of my vehicle, my M4 rifle pressed hard against my shoulder, firing controlled bursts toward the shadowy figures moving on the ridgeline. I remember the frantic, deafening thunder of my own heart, so loud it almost drowned out the sound of the gunfire. That night, lying in the dirt and dust, I learned that a person's worth isn't defined by the car they drive or the label on their suit. It's defined by whether they hold their position when all hell breaks loose. My family wouldn't understand that. How could they? Their battles were fought in boardrooms and country clubs. Mine were fought for stakes they couldn't possibly imagine. So, why was I even trying to win their approval? Why was I still showing up to these ceremonial executions of my character? The answer came to me years ago, in a dusty canvas tent at Bagram Airfield, with the deafening roar of C-130s taking off and landing just outside. Tucked into my rucksack, I had a dog-eared paperback copy of Simon Sinek's Start with Why. Between coordinating supply drops and inventory reports, I read. And one idea hit me like a physical blow. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. I thought about my family's why. My parents' why was to be admired, to maintain a flawless public image. Serafina's why was simpler, to win at all costs. Their entire lives were built around external validation. That night in the tent, I looked around at the young soldiers, barely out of their teens, hunched over notepads, writing letters home. In their tired faces, I found my why. It wasn't about glory or promotions. It was about making sure they had the armor, the ammunition, the medical supplies, everything they needed to be able to write that next letter home. That was the moment Aegis Tactical Solutions was born. Not in a garage in Silicon Valley, but in a war zone in the Middle East. It wasn't born from a desire for wealth, it was born from a solemn vow that I would never, ever let a soldier's life be endangered because a piece of equipment was delivered late or a system failed. So, was I going to let my father's joke about selling hoodies derail me? Not a chance. My why was too important. He and Serafina saw success as a 7-figure lawsuit or a corner office. But I learned what real success, real excellence, looks like. And it looks like Sergeant Maria Sanchez. She was a 45-year-old motor pool NCO from El Paso. A woman who could diagnose an engine problem just by listening to it hum. One night, the generator for the main surgical tent went down. No replacement parts were available for at least 12 hours. The male engineers were frantically pulling at wires, shouting at each other in the dark. It was chaos. 2 patients were on operating tables inside. Maria walked over, calm as ever. She listened to the sputtering engine for a moment, then pulled a simple paperclip from her pocket. With a pair of pliers, she bent it into a specific shape, wrapped it with a small piece of electrical tape she always carried, and jammed it into a socket deep within the machine. She hit the ignition. The generator roared back to life. She saved at least 2 lives that night. No one gave her a medal. There was no press release. To the Army, she just did her job. But to me, she was the embodiment of excellence, ingenuity under pressure, quiet competence that saved lives. That was the standard I held myself to. Not my sister's courtroom theatrics, not my father's social standing. The standard was Sergeant Maria and her paperclip. So, as I drove away from the party, the memory of their insults already fading, I wasn't angry. I was just separate. We weren't just in different lanes. We were on entirely different highways, heading in opposite directions. They could keep their country club trophies. I was in pursuit of something else, something real, something worth fighting for. My why was forged in the dust of Afghanistan, but my company, Aegis Tactical Solutions, wasn't built there. It wasn't born in a shiny Silicon Valley high-rise with kombucha on tap and venture capital funding. It was born in a damp, 1-car garage in the suburbs of Richmond, Virginia, thick with the smell of motor oil, burnt coffee, and desperation. My entire life savings from 8 years of service went into 3 used servers I bought from a company that went bankrupt. That was it. That was my kingdom. My days were a jarring split screen. By morning, I'd put on a blazer, drive my Honda to Northern Virginia, and pitch to defense contractors, groups of middle-aged men in expensive suits who looked at me like I was a kid playing dress-up in my dad's office. They'd listen with polite smiles, then say things like, "That's a very ambitious project for someone like you." By night, I'd come back to the garage, shed the blazer, and slide into my real uniform. An old army sweatshirt and jeans. I'd sit in the glow of the monitors and write thousands of lines of code until the words blurred together. Dinner was almost always the same. A peanut butter sandwich on cheap bread, and a Red Bull from the 24-pack I'd bought at Costco. This was my life for months on end. An exhausting, lonely cycle of trying to build a future while running on fumes. The loneliness was the hardest part. I remember one bitter January night, the kind of cold that seeps right into your bones. I was staring at my screen, the sting of a fifth contract rejection still fresh, when my phone lit up with Serafina's name. I hesitated, then answered, a foolish flicker of hope in my chest. The sound that greeted me was of music and loud, carefree laughter. "Hello, little entrepreneur," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I'm in Aspen. Just finished a fantastic day of skiing, and now I'm having a hot chocolate by the fire. I bet it's better than your damp little garage, huh?" I could hear a man's voice in the background ask, "Who's that?" And I heard Serafina's clear, cutting reply, "Oh, just the family failure." I didn't say a word. I just quietly ended the call. For a moment, I let my head fall onto the cold surface of my desk. Hot tears of pure exhaustion and humiliation streamed down my face. I was so tired of fighting, so tired of being the punchline. But then I pushed myself back up. I wiped my eyes with the sleeve of my sweatshirt, took a deep breath, and turned back to the screen. My family's disbelief was a constant grinding noise in the back of my head, telling me I wasn't good enough. It was a poison I had to fight every single day. If you know what it feels like to turn someone else's doubt into your own fire, show your support for this story with a like. And let me see that fire. Comment with a single fire emoji below if you've ever been there. I poured that fire, that fuel, back into my work. But the cruelest blow didn't come from my sister. It came from my mother. She called one morning a few weeks later, her voice sickeningly sweet. I should have known better, but a part of me, the part that was still a little girl, hoped she was calling just to see how I was. "Katie, honey," she began, "I have a tiny favor to ask. Could you lend Serafina $2,000? She needs a new handbag for the Bar Association Gala. A Hermes, I think. It's important for her image, you know." I was speechless. I was literally eating instant ramen for lunch that day, trying to save every last penny for a critical software license. "Mom, I don't have it," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Her tone shifted instantly from sweet to sharp, laced with accusation. "What do you mean you don't have it? You don't travel, you don't shop, you don't do anything. Where does all your money go, Catherine?" I couldn't explain the servers, the licenses, the endless grinding costs of starting a business from nothing. She wouldn't have understood. She didn't want to. In her eyes, a designer handbag for Serafina was a necessary investment, while my company was a frivolous hobby. In that moment, the full weight of my isolation crashed down on me. I knew I was truly, completely alone. For 18 long months, I pushed. Day in, day out, fueled by their doubt and my own stubborn refusal to fail. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, an email landed in my inbox. The subject line was simple: subcontractor agreement. It was from Lockheed Martin. A small $50,000 contract to develop a niche logistics module. It wasn't millions. It wasn't a headline-grabbing deal. But it was real. It was validation. I didn't shout. I didn't jump for joy. I just sat there in my worn-out office chair in the middle of my garage, staring at the screen, and I began to cry. Not tears of sadness or exhaustion, but tears of pure, unadulterated relief. It was like a dam inside me had finally broken. I had done it. That night, I didn't go back to the garage after my day meetings. I drove my faithful old Honda to the best steakhouse in the city. I walked in, alone, and took a seat at the bar. I ordered a 20-ounce bone-in ribeye, cooked medium rare, and a glass of top-shelf Kentucky bourbon. When the food came, I took a moment, looking at the plate. It was more than just a meal. It was a monument to 18 months of ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches. It was proof. I picked up my glass, the amber liquid glowing in the dim light. I raised it, not to celebrate, but to honor my own survival. That solitary steak dinner was a declaration of my own survival, but it was also the loneliest meal of my life. For months, Aegis was just me, a garage, and a seemingly impossible goal. but I wasn't destined to fight that war alone. The first reinforcement arrived in the form of Marcus Thorne. Mark was the first person I hired. He was a former Green Beret, a tall, quiet man with eyes that saw everything and a handshake that could crush walnuts. He found me through a veterans network. When he came to my garage for an interview, I had a whole business plan ready to show him, filled with charts and 5-year projections. He didn't even glance at it. He just looked me in the eye, took in the cramped space, the humming servers, and the fire in my eyes, and asked one simple question. "What's the mission, boss?" Not, "What's the pay?" or "What are the benefits?" but "What's the mission?" He got it instantly. And from that day forward, he never doubted me for a single second. Months later, we lost a major contract at the last minute to a competitor with deeper pockets. I was devastated. I saw it as a catastrophic failure. I locked myself in my small office, which was really just a corner of the garage partitioned off by a bookshelf, and just stared at the wall, feeling the weight of everything crashing down. Mark didn't offer empty platitudes. He didn't tell me it would be okay. He just quietly walked in, placed a mug of black coffee and a donut from the shop down the street on my desk. "Eat," he said, his voice calm and steady. Then we counterattack. In the corporate world, that might seem like a small gesture. In the military, that kind of quiet, unwavering support is everything. It's called absolute trust. He was the brother I never had, standing guard at my flank. My second in command was Jocelyn Reed. If Mark was my shield, Jocelyn was my sword. She was a former finance officer from the Marine Corps, a petite woman who stood 5'3" but carried herself with the authority of a general. She could dismantle a hostile spreadsheet with surgical precision and silence a condescending loan officer with a single, icy stare. I learned that firsthand when our small business loan was up for review. The bank got nervous about our cash flow and threatened to pull our line of credit, which would have been a death sentence. I was panicking, but Jocelyn just told me, "I'll handle it." She went to the bank by herself, armed with a briefcase full of meticulously organized financial statements and projections. I have no idea what she said in that meeting. But an hour later, the bank manager himself called me, stammering apologies and offering to increase our credit limit. She was the firewall that protected our company, but she also became the sister I always wished for. She taught me that real strength isn't about being the loudest person in the room. It's about being the most prepared, armed with facts, and a lethal kind of calm. With Mark and Jocelyn by my side, Aegis began to grow. We moved out of the garage and into a real office space. But the moment I knew I had truly found my tribe, my real family, came during our 3rd year on Thanksgiving. I had lied to my parents, telling them I had an urgent business trip. The thought of another holiday dinner under their judgmental gaze was unbearable. My plan was to spend the day at the empty office, catching up on work, and then go home to a frozen dinner. It was a bleak prospect, but it was better than the alternative. But when I pulled into the parking lot that morning, I saw their cars. I walked in, and the office wasn't dark and silent. The lights were on, and the air was filled with the warm, savory aroma of roasted turkey. Mark and Jocelyn were there. They had set up a folding table in the middle of our main workspace. Mark was carving a perfectly browned turkey, and Jocelyn was pulling a homemade pumpkin pie out of a toaster oven she'd brought from home. "We figured you weren't going anywhere," Jocelyn said with a small smile. "And my grandma's pumpkin pie recipe is too good not to share." We ate our Thanksgiving dinner sitting on overturned cardboard boxes, using paper plates and plastic forks. There was no polished silver, no silk tablecloth, no crystal glasses. But as we sat there, sharing stories and laughing, I felt a warmth and a sense of belonging I had never once felt at my parents' immaculate dining table. That night, surrounded by my chosen family, I cried. Not from loneliness or humiliation, but from overwhelming, soul-deep gratitude. We eventually hired more people, mostly other veterans. Our office never felt like a tech startup. It felt like a forward operating base. We had a coffee-making leaderboard to settle heated debates about who brewed the best pot. We adopted a goofy yellow Labrador named Radar, who became our official chief morale officer. We didn't have pointless meetings, we had short, daily sit reps. Situation reports. Here, nobody cared what car you drove or what brand of clothes you wore. They cared if you completed your mission. They cared if you had your teammates back. This was a place built on shared values and mutual respect. This was my family. Comparing it to the cold performative dinners at the Oakmont, with the cutting words and the icy silence, how did they ever dare to call that family? After finding my family at Aegis, a sense of peace had settled over my life. The constant noise of not being good enough had finally faded, replaced by the quiet confidence that comes from being valued for who you are, not who someone wants you to be. And then, after nearly a year of blessed silence, my phone rang. The caller ID read, "Dad." My first instinct was to ignore it, but he called again and again. On the third ring, I answered, my guard immediately up. His voice was a shock. It was unnaturally warm, dripping with a manufactured sweetness I hadn't heard in years. "Katie, sweetheart, it's been too long. How about we all have dinner this weekend, at the inn at Little Washington? I've already made a reservation. I want to hear all about your work." My heart constricted. "I want to hear all about your work." Those were the words I had longed to hear my entire life. And just like that, a foolish, treacherous flicker of hope ignited in my chest. Maybe he had changed. Maybe they finally wanted to understand. Against my better judgment, I said yes. When I told Mark, he just shook his head slowly, his expression grim. "Be careful, boss," he warned. "A snake doesn't change its stripes." I wish I had listened. The inn at Little Washington was a monument to opulence. 3 Michelin stars, hushed tones, and waiters who moved like ghosts. The performance began the moment I arrived. My father stood to kiss my cheek. Serafina, impossibly, even complimented the simple black dress I was wearing. They poured expensive wine, they asked about my company, they listened with feigned interest as I spoke about our growth. For about an hour, it was almost perfect. It was almost normal. And then, just after the dessert plates were cleared, the curtain went up on the real reason for the evening. Serafina started, sighing dramatically as she stirred her espresso. She began a long, winding story about a business associate of hers, someone who was having a bit of trouble with a military equipment contract. "It's just some minor paperwork issues, really," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "Bureaucratic red tape, you know how it is." She then turned her full attention to me, her eyes gleaming with predatory intent. "Katie, you work in this world. You must know someone at the Pentagon who could, help expedite things a little. For family." The air in my lungs turned to ice. For family. The entire elaborate, expensive, "we're so proud of you" dinner was a lie. It was an ambush, carefully staged to soften me up for the kill. I could feel the blood pounding in my temples. Expedite things was a polite, sanitized term for procurement fraud. They wanted me to use the relationships I'd built on a foundation of integrity and blood, relationships with people I respected, people who trusted me, to commit a felony. "Serafina, that's not how it works," I said, my voice dangerously calm. My father jumped in immediately, playing the part of the reasonable patriarch. "Oh, don't be so rigid, Katie," he said, his tone chiding like I was a stubborn child. "Sometimes you have to be flexible for family." And that's when I finally understood. This wasn't just a misunderstanding of my world. This was a deliberate attempt to corrupt it. They didn't just fail to see my values, they actively wanted to dismantle them. They couldn't stand that I had built something clean, something honorable, on my own terms. So they had to find a way to drag me down into the mud with them, to make me one of them. They wanted to stain the only thing I had that was truly mine. My hands were steady as I placed my fork and knife down on the plate, the quiet clink of metal on porcelain sounding like a gunshot in the hushed dining room. "I can't," I said, my voice low but absolute. There was no room for negotiation. Serafina's mask of civility shattered. She leaned forward, her face contorted with rage. "There's that self-righteous tone again," she spat, her voice rising. "Where do you think you got everything? The opportunities, the connections, from this family, from the Burns name, and now you turn your back on us? You ungrateful. Her voice was getting louder, attracting glances from the other tables. The carefully constructed image of the perfect family was cracking before her very eyes, and it was making her frantic. I didn't say another word to her. I stood up, my movements deliberate. I pulled 5 $100 bills from my wallet and laid them neatly on the table, more than enough to cover my share of the farce. I looked directly at my father, into his shocked and angry eyes. "I'm sorry I disappointed you," I said. The words were for him, but the meaning was for me. I was sorry I had let myself be disappointed by him, by them, one last time. Then I turned and walked away, leaving them frozen in a tableau of stunned fury. I didn't look back. I walked past the sommelier, through the ornate lobby, and out into the cold night air, each step feeling lighter than the last. But the relief only lasted until I was back in my car. I drove for about 10 miles, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. Then I pulled over onto the gravel shoulder of the dark country road, cut the engine, and finally let go. I leaned my head against the steering wheel and wept. Not tears of sadness, not tears of loss, but hot, furious tears of anger. An anger directed entirely at myself for being stupid enough to hope, for being stupid enough to walk right back into the snake pit just because the snake had smiled. The anger I felt after that dinner didn't fade. For 2 days, it simmered just below the surface, a cold, hard knot in my stomach. It wasn't the volatile, tearful anger of my youth. This was different. It was a patient, focused rage waiting for its moment. I didn't have to wait long. She appeared in our office lobby unannounced. Serafina. She was dressed in a sleek navy blue power suit, but the look of polished control didn't reach her eyes. They were wild with a frantic, cornered panic. Mark, ever the gatekeeper, moved to intercept her at the reception desk. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he asked, his voice polite but firm, his body language creating a clear barrier. "Get out of my way," she snapped, physically shoving him aside. Mark, a Green Beret who could have stopped her with one hand, simply let her pass, his eyes flashing a warning to me as she stormed toward my office. She burst through my door without knocking. "We need to talk," she hissed, her voice trembling with a desperate urgency. "I told you, this is important." I calmly stood up from my desk and walked over to my office door, closing it with a quiet, deliberate click. I turned to face her, my arms crossed. The anger inside me had cooled into something solid, something like steel. "My answer is still no, Serafina," I said, my voice as cold and flat as a frozen lake. "You are asking me to commit a federal crime, to betray every principle I stand for. The answer will always be no." She stared at me, her chest heaving, and then she laughed. It wasn't a sound of amusement. It was a high, unhinged shriek that scraped at the air. "Principles?" she sneered, the word dripping with venom. "You want to talk to me about principles? You? The girl who hid in the army for 8 years because she couldn't handle the real world? What are you now, Captain America?" She took a step closer, her face contorted in a mask of fury, and jabbed a finger toward my face. "You owe this family. You owe me. Dad co-signed your first business loan, or did you forget that? Without the Burns family name, nobody would have even given your pathetic little company a second look." And that was it. That was the line. She hadn't just insulted me. She had spat on my service. She had invaded my sanctuary and desecrated the one thing, the one piece of my life that was truly sacred. We all have a breaking point, a line that, once crossed, changes everything forever. If you're here for the moment I finally found mine, show your support for this story with a like. And if you've ever reached that point yourself, let me know by commenting with the single word that says it all. Enough. The rage inside me didn't explode. It imploded, collapsing into a single, infinitely dense point of clarity. A strange calm washed over me, the kind of absolute focus you find in the moments just before a battle. I looked her straight in the eye. My stillness seemed to unnerve her more than any shouting match could have. "You're right about one thing, Serafina," I said, my voice even and steady, devoid of any emotion at all. I have been silent for far too long. I let you and Mom and Dad define who I was. I let your shallow, bitter world make me question my own worth. I held her gaze, not letting her look away. But that ends. Right here. Right now. With that, I turned and pulled open my office door. My entire team was standing in the main workspace, their faces a mixture of concern and anger. They had heard everything. I looked past my sister, directly at my most trusted officer. Mark, I said, my voice ringing with an authority I hadn't used since I took off my uniform. Please escort Ms. Burns out of the building, and make sure she understands she is never, ever to set foot on this property again. Serafina's jaw dropped. She looked utterly stunned, as if she couldn't comprehend that I was capable of giving such an order. Mark simply nodded once, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. Yes, boss, he said, and moved toward her. You can't do this, she shrieked as Mark firmly took her by the elbow. I'm your sister. You'll regret this, Catherine. You'll come crawling back. I watched as he escorted her, still shouting threats and insults, out the front door and into the harsh afternoon light. The moment the door clicked shut, a profound silence fell over the office. I turned to face my team, my family. I saw their worried faces, and I felt a surge of protectiveness. I apologize that you all had to witness that, I said, my voice clear and strong. I took a breath and looked at each of them. Mark, Jocelyn, the others who had trusted me with their careers and their loyalty. My biological family. They don't understand what we do here, what we stand for. I paused, letting my words sink in. But they're about to get a real clear lesson. They wanted to play a game. Fine, we'll play. But we're going to play it by my rules. I looked around the room. I didn't see pity in their eyes. I saw respect. I saw resolve. I saw a team ready for their mission. The battle lines had been drawn, and for the first time, I was ready to fight back. The moment the front door closed behind Serafina, the rage vanished. It had served its purpose, like a rocket booster falling away once the payload reaches orbit. Now was not the time for the heat of emotion. It was time for the cold, hard calculus of strategy. General Patton once said, "A good plan, violently executed now, is better than a perfect plan next week." My family had waged a long war of attrition against me. My response would be a single, decisive counteroffensive. My office immediately transformed into a command center. I called Mark and Jocelyn in and closed the door. The air was thick with the focused tension of a team preparing for a mission. I walked to the large whiteboard on my wall, its clean surface a stark contrast to the mess that had just unfolded. I wrote 2 lines in clean, black capital letters. Objective, re-education. Means, incontrovertible truth. I capped the marker. They think I'm a failure living in a garage, I began, my voice calm. They believe Aegis is a joke, and they feel entitled to use me to clean up their corrupt messes. Today, we are going to correct the record. Jocelyn, I need every financial transaction between me, this company, and my family. Every loan, every repayment, every wire transfer my mother ever requested. Pull it all. She nodded, already typing. On it. I've had a private file on this for years, just in case. Of course she did. That was Jocelyn. I turned to Mark. Serafina mentioned a business associate. He's trying to get a military contract. She was desperate. That means he's in trouble. I need to know who he is and what his problem is. Dig deep. Consider it done, boss, he said. Anger is a luxury. Discipline is a weapon. For the next 3 hours, my office was silent except for the quiet clicking of keyboards. Jocelyn worked her financial magic, her screen a blur of spreadsheets and bank records. I compiled years of company reports, contracts, and performance reviews, laying them out on the conference table like battle plans. We were building an arsenal, not of bullets, but of facts. Hard, cold, undeniable facts. Just after 5 p.m., Mark came back into my office, closing the door behind him. His face was like stone. Boss, it's worse than we thought, he said, sliding a tablet across my desk. Serafina's associate isn't just having paperwork trouble. His name is Richard Thorne, and his company is on an FBI watch list for supplying defective counterfeit electronic components to the Department of Defense. They're building a fraud and conspiracy case against him. A cold dread washed over me. I read the details. Defective guidance chips, faulty wiring harnesses, components that could fail mid-flight. My sister, in her breathtaking arrogance, hadn't just asked me to bend the rules. She had tried to make me an unwitting accomplice in a federal investigation that involved endangering the lives of American service members. It wasn't just about money, it was about blood. The sheer recklessness of it, the utter disregard for my life and my honor, was staggering. She wasn't just trying to use me, she was willing to burn my entire world down to save her own skin. That night, I drove home, but not to rest. There was one more piece of the puzzle I needed. I went straight to my garage, not the cramped, oily one where Aegis was born, but the clean, well-lit garage of the house I'd bought 2 years ago. Under heavy canvas tarps, my milestones were waiting. I pulled the cover off the first car, a cherry red Corvette Z06. I bought it the year Aegis broke its first million in revenue. I remembered signing the papers, my hand shaking, not from the expense, but from the sheer, dizzying reality that I had done it. Next, I unveiled a Dodge Viper ACR, painted in venomous black. That was for the exclusive cybersecurity contract we landed with the Air Force, a brutal competition that had pushed us to the brink. This car was a monument to sheer tenacity. And last, my masterpiece, a Ford GT, in classic blue and white. That was the day an independent firm valued Aegis in the 9 figures. It wasn't just a car, it was a symbol that the garage project was now a national asset. These weren't toys. They were my medals, tangible proof of sleepless nights and relentless work. My family judged me by the car I drove. Fine. It was time to speak their language. I left the tarps on the floor, the polished metal gleaming under the fluorescent lights. It was time for my arsenal to see the light of day. With all the pieces in place, I sat down in my kitchen and picked up my phone. I dialed a number I hadn't called in a very long time. It rang twice before a familiar, powerful voice answered. Allen. Senator Allen, this is Catherine Burns, I said, my voice steady. I apologize for calling you at this hour. Ms. Burns, not at all. Is everything all right? That was quite a scene at the club the other night. Everything is fine, sir. But I felt it was my duty to inform you of the truth behind the free-spirited little sister you met at the Oakmont. I didn't speak to him as a victim. I spoke as a CEO, a defense contractor, reporting a potential threat to national security involving a member of his social circle. I laid out the facts about Richard Thorne, the FBI watch list, and Serafina's desperate attempt to entangle me in it. I spoke his language, the language of risk, liability, and national interest. He listened without interruption, the silence on his end of the line growing heavier with each detail. Tomorrow, I concluded, my voice leaving no room for a refusal, there's going to be a family meeting to address this. And I think, for your own protection as well as the integrity of this matter, you should be there. The next morning, my father called, just as I knew he would. His voice was laced with fury. Catherine, you will come to the house immediately. We are going to sort this out right now. I let him finish his tirade. Then I replied calmly, I've booked the Washington room at the Jefferson Hotel for 10 a.m. Dad, Mom, Serafina, be on time. I hung up before he could object. The battle would be fought on my turf, by my rules. When they arrived, they walked in expecting to find me alone, ready to be reprimanded. Instead, they walked into an ambush of their own making. At the long mahogany conference table, I was waiting, and I was not alone. To my right sat Jocelyn. To my left, our corporate counsel. And at the head of the table, his face a mask of stern disappointment, sat Senator Allen. The arrogant confidence on Serafina's face evaporated instantly, replaced by a flash of pure, unadulterated panic. My father's angry momentum stalled, his mouth hanging slightly open. My mother just looked confused, clutching her purse like a life raft. The stage was set, but this was my play. I remained seated. I didn't say a word. I simply gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to Jocelyn, She clicked a button on her laptop, and the large screen at the end of the room came to life. The first image was the crisp, clean logo of Aegis Tactical Solutions. It was followed by a rapid succession of slides. A bar chart showing quarterly revenue growth, the bars climbing steadily past the $20 million mark. A slide detailing a $15 million contract with the U.S. Air Force. A list of our Fortune 500 corporate partners. This, Jocelyn said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence, is the pathetic little company Miss Serafina Burns referred to 2 days ago. My father stared at the screen, his expression unreadable. My mother looked like she was trying to do complex math in her head. Serafina just looked sick. Jocelyn clicked again. A new slide appeared. It was a scanned copy of a bank statement. And this, she continued, her tone as cold as ice, is a summary of wire transfer requests from Mrs. Eleanor Burns to Miss Serafina Burns over the last 3 years, paid from a joint account co-signed by Dr. Alistair Burns, totaling over $75,000. The memo line for each transfer is noted here. Image expenses. A strangled gasp escaped my mother's lips. The silence in the room was now absolute, suffocating. Then it was my turn. I stood up slowly. Serafina, I began, my voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. You asked for my help with a man named Richard Thorne, but you neglected to mention one critical detail, that he and his company are the target of an active FBI investigation. I reached down and placed a thick, bound file in the center of the table. It landed with a heavy, definitive thud. This is the preliminary FBI case file against Mr. Thorne for fraud and conspiracy, detailing his company's practice of supplying defective military hardware. Had I done what you asked, had I used my position to expedite his contract, I would be facing up to 20 years in federal prison for conspiracy and endangering national security. Serafina's face went completely white. She looked like a ghost. My father sputtered, That's impossible." Senator Allen, who had been silent until now, finally spoke, his voice heavy with disgust. He didn't even look at Serafina. He looked at my father. "I'm afraid it's very possible, Alistair. I made my own inquiries last night. The investigation is quite serious." My father sank back into his chair, as if he'd been physically struck. The weight of public disgrace, the one thing he feared above all else, was crashing down upon him. I let the weight of that reality settle in the room for a long moment. Then, I walked to the head of the table. "For my entire life," I said, my voice resonating with a calm, unshakable power, "you have judged me. You judged my career, my choices, my life. You judged me by the car I drive." I looked at each of them, my sister, trembling with fear, my mother, crying silently into a handkerchief, my father, looking like a broken man. "So now I will speak to you in the only language you have ever understood." I pressed a button on the remote control in my hand. The screen changed. The first image was of the red Corvette Z06, gleaming under the lights of my garage. Click. The black Dodge Viper ACR. Click. The blue and white Ford GT. The final slide showed all 3 cars, with their official ownership documents and market valuations listed beside them. Total value, $850,000, I stated, my voice devoid of triumph. "But you're wrong if you think this is about bragging. These cars aren't for you to see. They are my milestones. My medals, earned with sleepless nights and relentless work. They represent my success, in terms you can't possibly misinterpret." I paused, then lowered the remote. "As for the Honda, I keep it to remind me of where I came from, and of the years of struggle it took to get here. It represents integrity. It represents the truth. These cars," I gestured to the screen, "are merely the result." I gathered my things. "This meeting is over," I announced. "From this day forward, any and all communication between myself and this family will be conducted through my attorney." I turned and walked toward the door, not waiting for a response. I didn't need one. As my hand touched the handle, I heard Serafina's voice, a desperate, broken whisper. "Katie, wait." I stopped, but I didn't turn around. I had nothing left to say. The war was over. And in the silence that followed, I walked out of the room, leaving the ruins of their world behind me. After I walked out of the Jefferson Hotel, I expected to feel triumphant, vindicated. I had won by every conceivable metric. I had spoken the truth, reclaimed my story, and exposed their hypocrisy in spectacular fashion. But as I got into my car and drove away, there was no sweet taste of victory. There was only a vast, hollow emptiness. It was a silence that follows a storm, where the air is clean but the landscape is irrevocably changed. I had done what needed to be done. But in doing so, I had officially closed a chapter of my life. I had surgically removed a toxic part of my past, and the procedure, while necessary, had left a wound. In that quiet conference room, I had lost my family. Or maybe, the more painful truth was, I had simply been forced to admit to myself that I had lost them a long, long time ago. That the family I had been mourning was just an idea, an image I had clung to out of a desperate, childish hope. I drove for hours that afternoon with no destination, heading west on I-64, watching the rolling hills of Virginia blur past my window. I just let the rhythmic hum of the tires on the asphalt fill the silence in my head. I wasn't running from anything anymore. I was just driving, letting the motion soothe the strange stillness inside me, as if the forward momentum of the car could somehow propel me into the next phase of my life, leaving the wreckage behind. In the days that followed, the aftershocks began. My phone, which had been silent for so long in relation to them, started ringing incessantly. Serafina was first, leaving a string of rambling, tearful voicemails. They were a bizarre cocktail of frantic apologies and venomous accusations. One message would be, "Katie, I'm so sorry. I never meant. I was just so desperate." And the next would be, "How could you do this to me, to the family? You've ruined everything with your self-righteous crusade." It was the desperate thrashing of someone who had never been held accountable. Then came my mother's calls. Her voice wasn't apologetic, it was sharp with indignation. "Catherine, your father is beside himself. You deliberately humiliated us. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? By tearing this family apart?" She still saw their image, not their actions, as the thing that needed protecting. My father, true to form, remained silent. He didn't call once. His silence was, in its own way, the loudest condemnation of all. I listened to the first few messages, a strange sense of detachment washing over me. Then I stopped. I didn't answer a single call. It wasn't out of spite or hatred. It was an act of self-preservation. I had fought too hard for this newfound peace to let them drag me back into their hurricane of dysfunction. Jocelyn had told me once, during a particularly tough week, setting boundaries isn't about keeping other people out. It's about protecting the territory you fought for inside yourself. So, one by one, I opened my contacts list. Serafina Burns, Mom, Dad. With a strange sense of solemnity, I scrolled down and tapped "Block this caller" for each of them. It was a small, simple action on a glowing screen, but it felt monumental. It felt like I was building a fortress wall, stone by heavy stone, around the small, quiet space I had finally carved out for myself. Amidst the chaos of their desperate calls, a single piece of mail arrived at the office that cut through the noise. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope with the official seal of a state senator in the corner. It was from Senator Allen. My first thought was that it was a formal note of apology for being involved in our family drama. It was so much more than that. It was a handwritten letter, penned in a strong, steady hand. He wrote that the meeting had left a deep impression on him, not because of the family conflict, but because of my conduct. He told me about his own son, a Marine who had served 2 tours in Iraq and had struggled to find his footing after coming home. He said he understood, in a small but profound way, the price of service and the quiet, unshakable integrity it instills in people who have worn the uniform. He wrote, "Ms. Burns, what I witnessed in that room was not just a business person defending her company. It was a soldier defending her honor. In a world that too often values appearance over substance, your integrity is a national asset. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." Reading those words, sitting alone in my office, I finally cried. Not the hot, angry tears I'd shed in my car, but quiet, grateful tears that I hadn't been able to cry for my own family. The recognition from a near stranger, from someone who truly understood the code I lived by, was more validating than 1,000 empty apologies from people who shared my blood, but not my values. It was a balm on a wound I didn't even know was still so raw. It was the approval I had always craved, coming from a place I never expected. That weekend, instead of taking one of the supercars out for a drive, I found myself back in my garage, drawn to the oldest member of my fleet, the Honda Accord. I opened the door, the familiar scent of old upholstery greeting me like an old friend. I sat in the driver's seat in the darkness, my hands resting on the worn, smooth leather of the steering wheel. This car, this humble, reliable car had seen it all. It had been my silent witness. It had waited patiently outside the garage as I cried tears of exhaustion over failed code. It had carried me to the bank to plead for loans, and to that steakhouse to celebrate a lonely victory. It was the car I drove home from the airport after my last tour, the first piece of my new civilian life. Serafina had called it a symbol of my failure. She was so wrong. It was a symbol of my resilience, my quiet, unassuming, never-give-up companion. It had never failed me, not once. I leaned my head back against the headrest, a small, genuine smile forming on my lips. "Well, old friend," I whispered into the quiet darkness of the garage, "we've come a long way, haven't we?" And sitting there, in the silence, feeling the weight of the past and the lightness of the future, I knew what I had to do next. The morning after my quiet conversation in the garage, I knew exactly what I had to do. I drove my Honda not to a dealership to trade it in, but to the local chapter of a charity I deeply respect, one that provides reliable vehicles to veterans and their families who are struggling to transition back to civilian life. Waiting for me was a young former Army sergeant, barely in his mid-20s. He had the unmistakable posture of a soldier, but his eyes held the weary anxiety of a young father trying to find work to support his wife and 2 small kids. He told me he'd been taking 3 different buses to get to job interviews, a process that took hours each way. This car, he said, would change everything for them. I handed him the keys. He looked down at them, then back at me, his eyes shining with a gratitude so profound it struck me silent. That single look held more value than all the supercars in my garage combined. It was a look of hope, of a burden being lifted. "Take good care of her," I said, my voice a little thick. "She took very good care of me." He nodded, unable to speak, and just shook my hand firmly. As he and his wife drove the Honda off the lot, I didn't feel a sense of loss. I felt a final weight lift from my shoulders. The car that had been a symbol of my struggle was now becoming a symbol of someone else's new beginning. I wasn't erasing my past. I was honoring it by paying it forward. A few days later, at our weekly all-hands meeting at Aegis, I had another announcement to make. "As we grow," I said, looking out at the faces of my team, my family, "it's critical that we never forget our why. We are here to support the warfighter. That mission doesn't end with our products. It extends to the people." I took a breath. That's why today I'm officially announcing the formation of the Evans Burns Scholarship Fund. A quiet murmur went through the room. "Major Evans was my first commanding officer," I explained. "He taught me that a leader's primary duty is to take care of their soldiers, to provide cover for those coming up behind you. This fund will do just that. It will provide seed capital, mentorship, and full legal and technical support to veterans who want to start their own businesses in the tech sector. Aegis is more than a company. It's becoming a legacy. And this is how we honor the people who shaped us." The applause that followed wasn't just polite, it was thunderous. It was a shared commitment to a purpose larger than ourselves. In that moment, I knew I had built more than a successful business. We had built a community with a soul. The final piece of validation came a week later, not in the form of a bank statement or a new contract, but in a simple, formal email. It was an official invitation from the Department of Defense. I was being asked to come to the Pentagon to present Aegis's next-generation cybersecurity model to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I printed out the attached travel authorization for my flight to Washington, D.C. Staring at the paper, I didn't feel the giddy pride my family would have expected. I felt a profound and heavy sense of responsibility. This was my stage. Not a country club ballroom, not a hotel conference room where family dramas played out. My stage was a secure briefing room where the decisions made could actually protect the lives of soldiers on the front lines. It was the ultimate affirmation that I had chosen the right path, the right mission. The story ends not in a boardroom or a garage, but on the open road. It's a cool evening in late September. I'm behind the wheel of the Corvette, the red paint glowing in the soft light of the setting sun. I'm driving along the Blue Ridge Parkway, the winding road unfurling before me like a ribbon. The windows are down, and the crisp mountain air whips through my hair. I'm not running from anything anymore. I'm not trying to prove anything to anyone. I'm just driving, heading toward a future of my own design. My biological family will likely never understand me. They'll never grasp the world I've built or the values I hold. And I finally realized that's okay. It no longer matters. I have my own family, forged in trust and shared sacrifice. I have my own purpose, born from a vow made in a war zone. I have validated my own damn self. And ahead of me, the road is wide open, free, and entirely my own. That road? It wasn't just a highway in Virginia. It was a path I had to build for myself, one painful step at a time. My story might be mine, but this journey of finding your own worth, of defining your own family, belongs to all of us. If any part of it resonated with you, I'd be honored if you'd join our community here. Your like shows you support this message of strength, and by subscribing, you'll ensure you never miss another story. Until next time, keep driving toward your own horizon.